So let me just start with a question. How many people here would like more energy? Okay. Research shows, and we've done a lot of research, that having more energy is actually the #1 health goal. It tops everything else. When you look at it in an organizational context, research also shows, and we saw that 67% of people are not engaged in their work. So work, which takes up so much of our lives, is not actually energizing us. And we really want to change that. So today I'm going to share with you some of the things that I've done personally, as well as within the organization that I used to work at, to really lift the energy and to lift the performance of the organization. So let me start by just telling you a little story. So I remember the day very well. It was January the 4th, 2008, and I had just got back to work from my Christmas break. And I walked into the office, and I was working at a company called Reed Business Information, based out of London. And I'll tell you more about that company a little bit later on. But I walked into the office, and then my boss at the time, a lady called Jane, came over to me and said, "Lawrence, I need to see you straight away." So it was that kind of moment where I thought, what's happened? So we went into a room, and then Jane started to tell me that she's got another job. And not only that I was going to get her job. Now, this information actually stunned me, because you see, all Christmas, the whole holiday, I had been agonizing over a decision of whether to actually stay at RBI or leave, because I'd been offered another job for an internet startup business, which was in the environmental space. And it was a really interesting opportunity. But this information from Jane really changed things for me, because I never saw that coming. So instead of actually resigning as I planned to do, I found myself face-to-face with the group CEO that afternoon, talking about my new role as CMO for RBI, and it was a role that I was to do for the next 9 years. But it was a role that I nearly didn't happen. You see, because a month before I was due to start, and I started that role on March the 1st. I'm good with dates, you'll notice. I love history. But on March the 1st, 2008, I was due to start that job. And a month before that, I actually went to China. We'd bought a business, and I went to China on a 2-day trip. And it was a fascinating trip to Shanghai. All of the sights and sounds that that country had to offer. But it was very, very intense. So I was there for 2 days, and unknown to me at the time, I actually picked up a virus. I didn't know about this virus until the day after I came back. And I was in Kingston, so I used to live in southwest London, and I was out running, and it was a beautiful day, and I was running along unaware that I had this virus, and then suddenly the world went black. And I woke up and found myself in hospital, in Kingston Hospital, with all wires attached to me. And it was a scary, scary experience, because I had an irregular heartbeat. But you see, I was a big runner, so I thought I had the formula to health. So hearing all of this confusion around me shocked me, to say the least. But I stayed in that hospital for the entire weekend, really face-to-face with my mortality, until eventually my heart rate came back to normal, and they let me out. And when they let me out, I experienced the most, I can't describe it, but a sense of freedom that I'd never experienced before, because I never, ever wanted to allow myself to feel that vulnerable and that out of control again. So I did what every super controlling person does, and I became super focused on health, particularly diet, because logically I knew that food was part of us, and food was going to either make us healthy or make us not healthy. I didn't have the science, I didn't have the evidence, but intuitively I knew this was the case. So I became a real nutrition geek, and I read lots of different books on nutrition, and those books and that information really influenced my behavior, and I changed. And I changed quite dramatically in a very kind of cold turkey kind of way. So I stopped eating animal protein. I used to eat a lot of chicken, and I started eating plant-based protein. So I became a vegan, and I've been a vegan ever since that time. I used to drink gallons of black coffee, 7 cups a day. We had a Starbucks, and I knew this wasn't the best of my health, but I just didn't want to know. But I stopped drinking the 7 cups and started drinking green tea. I was a big runner, as I said, so having orange juice was my daily drink, a lot of orange juice. But I stopped drinking that and upgraded that to green juice. White bread and pasta, as any marathon runner would know, was a core component of my diet. Stopped that and started having raw bars, a lot of nuts. And I really had to challenge my own thinking because we'd been educated that low fat is good. So suddenly eating lots of nuts really shifted my mindset. Stopped having alcohol, started drinking kombucha before it became a major trend, as it now is. And I used to drink these dreadful, I don't know how I did it, to be honest, but I used to drink these dreadful energy drinks just because it was all about performance. I was running marathons and it was all about, can I go faster? Another kind of 10 seconds. It's amazing you kind of obsess over these things. But I started to drink something called electrolyte lemonade, which is a much better option. So I changed and I shifted, and whatever anybody tells you, change is really hard, even changing something like your diet, because you're changing your habits. And after day 3 of this massive, dramatic change, I found myself in bed with the worst flu I've ever experienced. Terrible. And I felt very, very depressed, if you like. All I wanted to do was go back. But I had a big why. I had a big reason for staying the way I did. I didn't want to be ill. I wanted to live. I had a lot of things to do. So I stuck with it. And on day 5, I started to feel better. Day 6, I started to feel a lot better. And day 7, I started to feel amazing. I had this huge surge of energy. I felt great. And at that point, I knew there was no going back. I had to keep going. But my knowledge, my education, I needed to really become more of a, I need to educate myself in terms of nutrition, which is what I did. And with that extra energy that I had, I was getting up at 5 a.m. I never used to get up that early, and I was going to bed much later. And I was using this extra time to study my passion around health and wellness. And I created a website which has developed into my Raw Energy brand. So I had all of this time and had kind of two lives really, because by night I was this nutrition geek, training to be a wellness coach and really applying what I was learning. And then by day I was working as Chief Marketing Officer for RBI, which was part of Reed Elsevier, this huge business which was going through massive change. So maybe if I just give you a little bit of context. So RBI started life as a magazine business. So the products were magazines, trained magazines, and we published products. And if you're familiar with the UK market, we published products like Farmers Weekly, Caterer and Hotel Keeper, Computer Weekly. So very industry vertical specific magazines. But by 2014, the business was on its way to becoming a data, software, and analytics business. So quite different, and it was an extremely exciting role, and I loved it, and we were changing everything, buying companies, selling parts of the business, innovating all over the place because we needed to. The business had a burning platform. And by 2014, we were on the path to success, as you can see from the share price, which has continued to grow. But you see, the problem was that whilst this was extremely exciting in terms of change, on the ground, the people around me were very stressed because, as we've heard, there was uncertainty. Uncertainty tends to lead to stress. People didn't know what was going to happen. We sold half the company in about 5 years, so that is incredibly uncertain. And with stress came overwhelm, and in some cases we had burnout. So people were not performing at their best because so much of that energy was focused on what could happen. So I spent a lot of my time as a functional leader, and by this point I was managing something like 200 people, really trying to keep people focused and to reassure people that things would be fine, even though as a leader I didn't know what was going to happen, to be honest, and that's the thing that you learn. You learn to deal with ambiguity and create visions of the future that people like to hear. In January 2014, I remember we had a board meeting. It was the executive leadership team, and we were talking about a topic that many of you here will talk about in your own companies, and it was how to accelerate revenue. And we had a presentation from the HR director at the time, a guy called Graham. And Graham was presenting his people strategy. And we'd never had a people strategy before. And he was talking about, we need to focus on talent, the war of talent. This is really important that we do this. I mean, the way we're going to do this is we're going to focus on improving our recruitment process, improving our learning development, having a strategy around reward and recognition. So they were the topics that he was talking about, and everyone was agreeing that these are good things to talk about. But something he wasn't talking about, because I was sitting there with my wellness lens, he wasn't talking about health. He wasn't talking about the health of the people. And unknown to him, we had all these issues around overwhelm and stress that weren't necessarily apparent to the leadership team at the time. But that conversation and that meeting actually inspired me to start to go on a journey of innovation myself, because I realized at that point that I could start to connect the two parts of my life, because I didn't know how. I had all of this knowledge around health and nutrition, and I had lots of people who were quite stressed and were in need of some of that insight. I went on a journey to create something which became the RBI Living Well program, something which has had a massive impact on the culture and the performance of that business and all of the different components within it. So if I just take you through the 3 steps that I went through to create a wellness program, but it's not just a wellness program, it's a program which really lifted the energy of the individuals, in turn impacted the performance, and also made a huge difference in terms of the perception of the brand. So it had a massive difference on retention and recruitment. So the very, very first step was discovery. I was developing a corporate wellbeing program, although at the time I didn't realize I was doing that. So the very first step was for me to really understand what success looks like. What companies out there are doing corporate well-being or creating wellness cultures in a really good way. So I looked at a lot of the software companies, as you'd imagine. I spoke to Google, who were doing like amazing things with lots of different services available to their employees. I spoke to Apple, I spoke to LinkedIn. I read some fantastic books, and if you want to read a really good book on culture, Delivering Happiness is a fantastic book. I really recommend that one. So I did all of that discovery and had a better idea of what good looks like, what success looks like. And then I went internally to understand what RBI actually were already doing, and I discovered that we were doing a lot. It's just none of it was communicated. So there were lists of things that were available in terms of benefits, but they were hidden on an intranet, and you had to know where the intranet page was to be able to actually get the benefit. So it wasn't particularly communicated very well. And then this was a big shift, and this really made a huge difference. Started to think about our employees as customers, because my background's marketing and developing products and marketing campaigns. So I'm very used to thinking about customers, and in the internal environment, it's exactly the same. So thinking about your employees as customers, which meant we needed to understand what our customers' problems were, what our employees' problems were, not what we wanted from a business point of view, because clearly we wanted everyone to be super productive and feel really happy to be at work, but we had to do things to enable them to get to that position. So we did a survey and got a huge response, and we spoke to lots of people, and from that we had a number of different struggles that we were quite clear, and people were very keen for us as a business to be able to help them. So the next step was test and learn. So based on all of the insight that we had, we brought that together and synthesized it and had a bit of an ideation, if you like, or a crazy brainstorm to think what are the things we could do. And there were lots and lots and lots of things that we could do. The trouble was that we only had one person in occupational health who was actually very stressed and overwhelmed herself, because you were seeing lots of different cases. And we wanted to do an event, like a launch event, something that really lifted the energy, like an energy festival. And we were very keen to do that. The trouble was that our occupational health person, as I say, was very overwhelmed, but also she didn't have the skills to organize one of these energy pumping events that would really kind of get the tone right. So we had to be resourceful. We had to think within the corridors of RBI. We had lots of skills. Part of our product mix was events. So we had people who could create events. We needed to know how to bring them together to co-create, to collaborate, even though it wasn't their jobs to do that. And that's pretty much what we did. So we managed to create a cross-functional team that had all of the different skills that we needed, as well as alignment in terms of the purpose, what we were trying to do. And we created an energy pump-in event, which was the very first RBI Living Well event, which had a massive difference, and it had a range of different services. So, for example, we did a lot of education. So we brought in speakers that were specialists in topics like sleep, like nutrition, like exercise, lifestyle topics that people didn't necessarily know, and it went extraordinarily well. We connected people together by providing free, healthy food. So it's my kind of core passion, as you can tell. But we wanted to challenge people's perception that eating well meant that you had to give up taste, you had to give up flavor, you had to eat what you don't like. So we provided amazing food from a company called Pod in London, which is a bit like Sumo, I have to say, but not nearly as good. But it had an amazing impact in terms of just bringing people together around food, because what happened is that people started to talk to each other as well, and we wanted to create more ideas for innovation. So one way to do that is to give everybody great food, and they will come and they will talk to each other, and you never know where those conversations will lead. We turned our training rooms into fitness studios, and we provided one-to-one testing. So we had some innovative technology in terms of health tech that came in, and we really wanted to open people's minds to what was actually happening inside them so they could take a data-driven approach to their own health. And as I say, it went extraordinarily well, and the feedback was fantastic in terms of where we were, and we'd launched it now into the environment, and it was a bit like a train that couldn't stop. So we had to keep going and develop it, and over the next 3 years, the third stage of the whole project was around growing and scaling. So we defined the proposition more carefully around the whole person. So we had a philosophy, the RBI Living Well philosophy and framework, which you see here. And the idea is that we're all individuals, we're whole people, and energy is something that fuels the whole thing. And energy isn't just physical energy, it's mental energy, it's emotional energy, it's energy from social interaction. And if you harness that energy, then you can and channel that energy in a way that drives growth, then of course you're unlocking the potential in your organization, the people potential in your organization. Because as I always say, every single innovation, every single marketing campaign, every single deal, there's a person at somewhere in that pipeline. And we often don't realize that. We often think, actually, let's do this. Let's look at these other companies. And the key thing that drove our growth was this real focus on people, to enable people to be themselves, to be authentic, and to bring their energy to the organization, so that the energy that we could develop turned into new creations. So over the next 3 years, the program developed and scaled, because RBI has 50 offices around the world. So challenge one was, how do we did this amazing event in one location, but the 49 other offices were saying, well, what about us? So we created campaigns around social media to try and connect people. Simple things. We did something called the 50 Days of Wellbeing, which was a very much kind of it's an education campaign, low level in terms of low barriers to entry. And we said, just do one thing every day that enhances your well-being. It doesn't have to be massive. It could just be adding a lettuce leaf to your hamburger. It doesn't really matter, but just do something that helps you move forward, because we believe that if you start, then you start to build momentum. You don't need to do what I did. You don't need to go cold turkey and become a vegan and do all these things. That was just my style. Everyone has a different starting point. And then the business embraced the program in a way that I couldn't have imagined, to be honest, when I started. I could never have thought it would have gone the way it did, because it became so much part of the culture. And when I left the business in December 2016, I made sure that there was the right succession plan in place to continue this program, so it could continue. Because I was there for 2 years to make sure it was really embedded in our culture, and it wasn't something that was attached to me. It was in the early days, but as it started to gain momentum, it's continued. And I've continued to consult through 2017, and it has now scaled not only to the 3,000 employees within RBI, but also to the other RELX divisions, which have thousands more people. So when you think about impact of what we can do as leaders, in terms of it's not just the people that work with us, and it's not just the impact they'll have on our businesses, but it's their families, it's other people in the communities. And work, as I see it, is really a community of people. And the more we can energize that community, the more we can bring people together. And wellness and health is something that everybody has in common. Because as I always say, everybody wants health. I don't think if I did a poll here, who would like illness? Nobody's going to put their hand up. Everyone wants health. It's just the work and the path and the education that's really out there feels that it has to be really hard to get health, and that isn't the case. So by the end of 2016, RBI was a more energized, more resilient, healthier place, and the business metrics like sickness had plummeted by 40%, and those numbers combined enabled us to get external recognition by winning the CIPD awards, which was fantastic. I couldn't believe it, to be honest, because we were up against some really big companies, and we were like a startup within a massive organization sort of building this proposition, but it was fantastic to get that external recognition. So the key lessons from the RBI Living Well case study is focus on the whole person. We are whole people, and as leaders, we have to recognize that. And I learned that managing a lot of people over a long period of time, that the more I understood the whole person, the more I was able to get the best out of them or help them grow, help them develop. Create the right environment. So changing the environment, changing the office environment. RBI took a lot of inspiration from Google, for example, and really shifted the office environments to create more collaborative spaces, and that really changed people's behavior. Invest in education, not just around wellness, but really helping people access the right knowledge. It's exactly what we heard from Melanie. There's so much great knowledge out there that could really help people move from a state of confusion to a state of clarity. And we need to set that information free and allow people to make their own decisions, and invest in services that make it easy for people. Everyone's busy these days, busier and busier. So having access to tests, for example, enable people to get information that saves them the time of having to go to the doctor. So we invested in testing. There were a number of people who were referred to specialists, and they wouldn't have had that information. They wouldn't have taken that action had they not been there. So my story of RBI ended at the end of 2016, and then I came to Australia around the same time and joined Sumo, really because my mission and Sumo's mission are so very aligned. I mean, Sumo's mission is to make Australia a healthier and happier place, and we're very, very authentic in that goal. Our purpose is fueling greatness, and we spent time last year really trying to understand what that means, because ultimately we have a responsibility. As a brand, we serve 5 million meals per year, and these are really healthy meals that really make a difference, and we listen to our customers a lot to make sure that the food tastes great. So really challenging that perception that healthy food equals compromise. We don't want to do that. And 5 million is where we are now. Our goal is to take that to a much bigger number, because the problem we're trying to solve is accessibility and clarity. Everyone's confused about what to eat. As I've worked in this industry now for the last year, I've got very, very deep with a lot of the different food companies, and I see it from a different perspective to how I saw it before. But everyone's confused, and that's why people are not going to invest the time I did, in terms of reading all the books on nutrition. I used to wonder why don't you just read the books, read the China study, it's great, all the answers are in there. But people are not going to do that. So we have to make it easier for people to make the right choices rather than the wrong choices. So do join our community. We have an app which enables you to access healthy food from a Sumo store. You can click and you can collect. You just download it and you'll get $5 off your next meal. This is a really good time to do this because we've just launched our autumn menu, and we have a new bowl called the Commander Bowl, which is fantastic. So do check that out. I mean, it's delicious, absolutely delicious. And also something else for you on my Raw Energy website. I've created a PDF, a great PDF, which gives you 20 ideas for energizing your workplace. So this is really brought together by all of my experience to give you those tips, give you those insights, and start where you are. I've written a couple of books on these topics. I wrote these in my spare time because of all of the all of the energy I had. But they're both available on Amazon. The success without stress is really because when I got into corporate well-being as a functional leader, my interest was food and exercise, and that's why I did it. But once I started getting involved in this area, I quickly got involved in the whole world of mental health and stress. And I gained so much great knowledge that I thought, why doesn't everyone know this? And all of the information around stress was very, very HRy. So I wanted to create a very accessible book, which is my success without stress. And that's it. So thank you for your attention.